Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever tried to do something on Ethereum? Maybe send some ETH, swap a token, or even mint an NFT and gotten hit with a fee that felt, well, surprisingly high?
Oh, yeah. Or maybe the transaction got stuck in that annoying pending state.
Right. Or worse, it failed entirely, but you still ended up paying.
It's definitely a familiar point of friction for, a lot of people interacting with the network. High gas fees are a reality on Ethereum, and they can certainly be a barrier.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, and this is what we want to dig into. They aren't some arbitrary tax, right?
Not at all. There's a well-defined system behind them. It's fundamentally driven by supply and demand for the limited space available in each block on the blockchain.
And the good news, there are actual concrete strategies you can use right now, here in 2025, to navigate them.
Exactly. That's the goal here.
So yeah, this deep dive is specifically tailored for you based on the material you've shared with us, the articles, the research, your own notes. Our mission is to really extract the most important insights.
To help you understand exactly what Ethereum gas fees are, how they work under the hood, especially after that big EIP 1.5 and 5.9 upgrade,
Which we'll definitely get into.
why they can fluctuate so wildly, and maybe most importantly, the practical steps you can actually take to manage them effectively.
And we've pulled together information from several expert sources. We're looking at detailed explanations of the fee market mechanics, some really concrete strategies for saving money.
Community discussions too, best practices, and a really essential look at those layer 2 scaling solutions. They're becoming so integral to the whole Ethereum experience now.
For sure. So prepare to move beyond just seeing that, that number pop up in your wallet and gain a real understanding of this crucial aspect of the Ethereum network.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with the absolute fundamentals then. What are gas fees and why do they even exist in the first place?
Okay, so at their core, gas fees are basically the cost of executing operations or, doing computational work on the Ethereum network.
Think of them like transaction fees, but you pay them in ETH.
Right. And they aren't paid directly in whole ETH usually, but in a smaller unit called GWEI, which is tiny. One GWEI is 1/1000th of an ETH, so 0.00000000001 ETH.
Got it. And the purpose? Why is this system even necessary?
Well, gas fees serve several pretty vital functions. First and foremost, they act as a deterrent against spam and malicious attacks on the network.
Ah, right. Without a cost, someone could just flood the network with useless transactions, right? Grind it to a halt.
Exactly, making it unusable for everyone else.
Makes sense.
They also help ensure resources are allocated fairly based on who's willing to pay for that computation. And critically, they incentivize and compensate the validators.
Who used to be miners, but now validators since the move to proof of stake.
Precisely. They compensate them for the computational resources they expend processing and validating transactions. And that compensation is, essential for keeping the network economically sustainable and secure.
Okay, so it's clear the cost isn't static. We've seen that. A simple ETH transfer has a kind of minimum cost, while other actions can be way more expensive.
That's correct. A basic ETH transfer needs a fixed minimum amount of computational work that corresponds to about 21,000 gas units.
And depending on network conditions, that might only cost a few dollars.
Yeah, could be. But interacting with complex smart contracts, like swapping tokens on something like Uniswap v3 or minting an NFT, that demands significantly more computation.
And the sources mention Uniswap v3 swaps can easily use, 100,000 gas units or more?
Easily. And things like adding liquidity could be around 450,000 units. So this complexity directly impacts the total gas units consumed, leading to potentially much higher overall fees, maybe $20 to $50, sometimes even $100 or more.
So the type of transaction determines the amount of work the gas units needed, but the price per unit of gas changes. Which brings us to how these fees are calculated now, especially after that big EIP 159 upgrade.
Right, EIP 155.9. That really changed the fee market quite fundamentally. It moved away from a simple first price auction to a more structured system.
So what's the formula now?
The current formula is basically your total fee, gas units consumed, multiplied by the base fee plus the priority fee.
Okay, let's break that down. First, gas units. Sometimes people see gas limit in their wallets.
Right. So gas units represent the measure of computational work needed for your transaction. The gas limit is the maximum number of gas units you're willing to let your transaction use.
And your wallet usually estimates this based on the transaction type. It's not about how busy the network is.
Exactly. It's purely based on the complexity of the operation itself. not the current network load.
Okay, then the base fee. That was the big change with EIP 1559, wasn't it?
It really was. The base fee is the mandatory part of the fee. It's automatically determined by the network's algorithm, and it adjusts dynamically based on how much block space is currently being used.
Trying to keep blocks about half full, is that right?
Yeah, the goal is around 50% full. If network usage goes above 50%, the base fee increases for the next block. If it drops below 50%, it decreases. Your wallet typically handles setting this automatically.
And the really interesting part here, highlighted in the sources, is what happens to that base fee.
Yes, this is key. The base fee is burned, it's destroyed, removed from circulation forever.
Which adds a deflationary pressure to ETH over time. That's a major economic shift.
Huge. Compared to the old system where all fees went to miners, this burning mechanism is significant.
So that mandatory part is gone forever, but there's still an optional bit, the priority fee.
Correct. The priority fee is basically an optional tip you can add.
And this goes directly to the validators.
Yes, exactly. Its purpose is to incentivize validators to pick your transaction over others, especially when the network is congested. It helps get it included in a block faster.
Okay, so to recap the calculation, it's the amount of work needed times the mandatory network price, which gets burned, plus any optional tip you add for speed.
That's the formula.
Seems clear enough. But then why does the total cost swing so wildly? 1 minute a swap is maybe $5. The next, it's 50 or more.
Well, if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the main driver, the number one reason for those high and volatile fees is still network congestion.
Right. Too many people trying to do things at once.
Exactly. They're all competing for that limited block space.
It really is like digital rush hour.
That's a perfect analogy. And the sources point to some predictable times for this congestion, right? Usually aligns with U.S. business hours, roughly, say, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. UTC.
You also see massive spikes during things like big NFT mints, right? Or major token unlocks.
Absolutely. Or even just significant global market movements can cause a surge in activity. During these peak times, that base fee, which adjusts automatically, can just skyrocket.
And the complexity of the transaction itself, as we mentioned, still plays a big role.
Definitely. Even if the price per gas unit, the GUI price, is relatively low, a super complex interaction needing, 450,000 units of gas is just inherently going to be more expensive than a simple 21,000 unit transfer.
Does the priority fee still contribute much to those price swings? I know EIP 1559 changed the auction dynamic.
It smoothed things out, but yeah, the priority fee still allows users who really need their transaction confirmed quickly to effectively outbid others.
So it can still drive up costs for everyone during those moments of intense demand.
It can. And of course, we can't forget the actual price of ETH itself. A modest fee in Y terms can still be a very high dollar cost if ETH's price is way up.
Good point. And market volatility in general probably just leads to more network activity and congestion.
For sure. More trading, more DeFi activity, it all adds up.
Okay, so let's say you've gone ahead, you've initiated a transaction, set your fees, maybe using the wallet defaults, and then you look, and it's just sitting there as pending, or even worse, it fails entirely. This brings up a really important and often frustrating point. What happens then? And why do you still pay a fee even if it didn't work?
Yeah, the pending transaction is a common one. It almost always means the fee you included, either the base fee wasn't quite high enough for the current block, or your priority fee was too low compared to others.
So the validators are just picking the higher paying transactions first?
Exactly. Yours gets left behind in the mempool, basically waiting for a block where the fees drop, or just until it gets its turn among similarly priced transactions.
Just stuck there, hoping conditions change.
Pretty much. Now, the sources explain that wallets like MetaMask often have a speed-up feature for these pending transactions.
Ah, I've seen that. What does it actually do?
What it does is it broadcasts a new transaction, but crucially, with the same unique identifier. This identifier is called the nonce.
The nonce, right, like a sequence number for your transaction.
Exactly. It ensures your transactions from your account are processed in the order you intend. So by sending a new transaction with the same nonce but a higher fee, you're basically telling the network, hey, ignore that old attempt, process this one instead because I'm paying more now.
But you still pay for the first attempt that got stuck.
Yes, you typically will still pay a fee for the original attempt that got stuck and was eventually replaced because the network did register it, and validators may have expended some effort on it before it was overwritten.
Okay. Now, what about a failed transaction? That feels even worse. You paid the fee, but the thing you wanted to happen didn't actually happen.
Right, failed transactions.
Hmm.
These often happen because of errors in how the user interacted with the contract, or sometimes issues within the smart contract code itself. Maybe you tried to do something the contract doesn't permit, or you didn't meet some
Well, like
requirement.
not enough balance for a swap or something.
Could be, yeah. Or trying to mint an NFT that's already sold out. And yes, it's frustrating, but crucially, as the sources point out, you still pay the gas fee for that failed transaction.
But why, if nothing actually happened?
Because the validators did expend computational resources attempting to execute your transaction. The gas fee covers the cost of that computation, regardless of whether the transaction's logic ultimately succeeded or hit an error and reverted.
Ah, okay. So the fee is for the attempt, for the work done by the validator.
Exactly. And this mechanism is actually critical for the network's security. It prevents malicious users from just spamming the network with endless transactions designed to fail, clogging things up at no cost to them.
Right, they can't just throw impossible computations at the network for free.
Precisely. On Bitcoin, this type of failure is less common because transactions are simpler and validated more upfront. But Ethereum smart contracts add that layer of complexity where execution can start, use resources, and then encounter an error state.
So on Ethereum, they actually try to run the code, and then they might find out it fails partway through.
That's a good way to put it.
Huh?
They perform the computational work defined by your transaction up to the point of failure, and the fee covers that work.
Now, one very common reason for failure mentioned in the sources is setting the gas limit too low.
Yes, that's a big one. Remember, the gas limit is the maximum computational allowance you set. If the transaction starts executing complex smart contract code and it runs out of the allocated gas before it can finish,
Whoa. It fails.
it fails due to out of gas.
How can you tell if that was the reason?
If you look up the transaction on a block explorer like Etherscan, and you see that it failed, but used almost exactly 100% of the gas limit you set, that's a very strong sign it ran out of gas.
And the fix for that is just try again with more gas.
Basically, yes. You'd retry the transaction, but this time manually set a higher gas limit. One source even suggests maybe doubling it for complex interactions, especially if you're on a layer 2 where limits can sometimes be tricky.
But you have to be careful, right? If it fails again with a higher limit.
You'll pay that higher fee for the second failed attempt. So you want to be reasonably confident the limit was the issue.
It really sounds like just relying on the default average or fast settings in wallets might not always be the best way to go cost-wise.
You're right. They're convenient, absolutely. But they're generally optimized for getting your transaction included reasonably quickly, not necessarily for getting the absolute lowest price. Especially when the network isn't super busy, those defaults might lead to overpaying.
And the sources mention you can manually adjust things.
Yes, in advanced wallet settings, like in MetaMask, you usually have the option to manually edit the base fee, the priority fee, and the gas limit if you want finer control over your costs and confirmation speed. Takes a bit more effort, but can save you money.
Okay, so we've covered what gas fees are, how they're calculated now post EIP 155 and 9, why they spike, and what happens with pending and failed transactions. Now, let's pivot to what's probably the most important part for you, the listener. The practical, actionable strategies to actually reduce the fees you end up paying.
Yeah, this is where you can really take back some control and potentially save significant amounts.
And one of the simplest yet often most effective strategies is just timing your transactions, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's like avoiding that digital rush hour we talked about earlier.
Right.
Transacting during off-peak hours can dramatically lower your costs, mainly because the base fee is naturally much lower when there's less demand for block space.
We're talking potentially big savings, like 50% or more.
Easily 50% plus, sometimes even more, yeah. This typically means late nights, think maybe 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. UTC, and especially on weekends. Sundays are often mentioned as a good time.
Also, maybe avoiding major holidays or like non-trading days.
Good point, yeah. Less institutional activity might mean lower fees sometimes.
But you don't have to just guess when these low periods are, right? There are tools.
Oh, definitely not. This is where gas tracking and estimation tools are incredibly valuable.
Like Etherscan's gas tracker.
Yep, Etherscan Gas Tracker is great. Block Native also has a good gas estimator, often available as a browser extension. There are even visual tools like TKEX Street that show the mempool activity.
And these give you real-time data.
Real-time data on current fees, often predictions for the near future too. Many wallets are even starting to integrate these tools directly. They help you see the optimal time And, importantly, the optimal price to set for your transaction so you don't overpay unnecessarily.
Okay, timing is one. Another strategy the sources highlight, especially if you're doing multiple things on chain, is batching transactions.
Right, batching. This is a really powerful efficiency technique, particularly for more active users.
So instead of doing, say, 5 separate transfers.
Exactly. Instead of initiating multiple individual transactions, like sending tokens to 5 different addresses one by one, or interacting with several DeFi protocols sequentially, you combine them all into a single transaction.
And the benefit is you only pay that sort of fixed base cost once.
Precisely. You pay the base fee component for the single transaction only once, plus, of course, the gas units required for all the combined operations within that transaction. But you avoid paying that base fee multiple times.
And the sources suggest this can lead to pretty significant savings.
Yeah, potentially cutting gas usage by like 30% to 70%, depending heavily on what exactly you're batching.
Are there specific tools for this?
There are tools like Gnosis Safe, which is often used for multi-signature wallets but enables batching, or dedicated tools like Multisender are designed for this. And increasingly, some dApps themselves are being built to allow multi-step operations within a single transaction flow.
Interesting. Okay, timing batching. And then there's the strategy that feels like the biggest game changer for Ethereum usage in 2025. Leveraging layer 2 solutions.
This is, yeah, arguably the single most impactful way to cut down on fees right now. Ethereum's entire scaling roadmap, especially after the move to proof of stake, heavily relies on layer 2s.
So how do they actually achieve these huge fee reductions? What's the magic?
Well, layer 2 networks, you've probably heard names like Arbitrum, Optimism, zk-Sync, Base. They work by processing transactions off the main Ethereum chain, off layer 1.
Okay, so the computation happens elsewhere.
Right. They then take hundreds, sometimes even thousands, of these off-chain transactions, bundle them together, or batch them, or roll them up.
Hence the term roll-ups.
Exactly. They roll them up and then settle that entire batch onto Ethereum's main layer, layer 1, in one single, much cheaper layer 1 transaction.
So you're effectively sharing the cost of that one expensive L1 transaction among all the L2 transactions in the batch.
That's precisely it. It dramatically reduces the effective gas cost per individual transaction that happened on the L2.
And the savings are substantial.
Hugely substantial. The sources consistently mention savings in the range of 80% to 99% compared to doing the same action directly on layer 1.
Wow, 80 to 99%. That's not just saving money. That fundamentally changes what you can even do on Ethereum, right? Makes smaller, more frequent interactions actually feasible.
Absolutely. It opens up so many possibilities that were just economically prohibitive on L1 for most users.
So how does someone actually start using an L2 if their funds, their ETH, and tokens are currently on layer 1?
You need to move your assets across. This process is called bridging. You essentially lock your assets on layer 1 and receive an equivalent representation on the layer 2 network you want to use.
And how do you do that bridging?
You can use the official bridges provided by the L2 projects themselves, like the Arbitrum Bridge or the Optimism Gateway. Or there are third-party bridge aggregators like Hot Protocol or Orbiter Finance, which can sometimes find more efficient or cheaper routes across different L2s and L1.
Okay, so you bridge your assets over, then what?
Then once your assets are on the layer 2, you just interact with the decentralized applications, the dApps and services that are built on or specifically support that particular layer 2 network.
And the experience is cheaper. Are there other benefits?
Yes, significantly faster confirmation times 2, often just 1 to 5 seconds for a transaction to be confirmed on the L2 versus potentially minutes on L1 during busy times.
Faster and massively cheaper. It really sounds like using L2s is becoming the default way to use Ethereum efficiently.
It really is. It's rapidly shifting from being just a good idea to being the standard practice for most everyday Ethereum interactions.
Okay, besides L2s, are there other ways platforms themselves might help users with gas costs?
Yeah, definitely. Platform discounts are another fairly simple strategy to look out for.
What kind of discounts?
Well, many platforms, especially newer projects or those building directly on layer 2s, might offer things like gas subsidies or rebates on fees, or sometimes even completely gasless transactions.
Gasless transactions, how does that work? Someone still has to pay the validator, right?
Yes, the gas fee still needs to be paid to the network validator. But in a gasless transaction scenario, the platform, or maybe a third-party relayer service, pays that fee on your behalf.
So you, the user, just sign the transaction to approve the action, but you don't actually need ETH in your wallet specifically for the gas cost at that moment.
Exactly. It's often implemented using concepts like meta transactions. These promotions are usually funded by the protocol's treasury or through partnerships as a way to attract users and encourage adoption.
So it pays to keep an eye out for those kinds of offers.
For sure. Following project announcements on their official channels or using discovery tools can help you find platforms offering these kinds of savings. It's a pretty straightforward way to reduce costs significantly if you find the right platform.
Now, the sources also briefly mentioned gas tokens, but noted it's more of an advanced strategy now.
Yeah, gas tokens are. Interesting. They were a mechanism more relevant before EIP 1559 that let users sort of exploit a refund mechanic in Ethereum. You could mint these tokens when gas was cheap and then burn them later when gas was expensive to get a refund, effectively storing cheap gas.
But EIP 1559 changed how refunds work, right?
It did, significantly, which means those traditional gas tokens, like GST2 or CHI, are largely obsolete or much less effective for regular users now.
So is the concept dead?
Not entirely. The idea has sort of evolved more into what's sometimes called gas abstraction. This is often built into Layer 2s or complex custom smart contracts. The goal is to simplify the user experience, maybe hiding the gas payment mechanism altogether or having it handled by someone else, which kind of ties back to those platform discounts and gasless transactions we just talked about. It's more relevant for developers or really advanced users now, not a typical strategy for most people.
Got it. Okay, since layer 2s are clearly so fundamental to managing fees effectively these days, let's maybe spend just a moment looking a bit closer at the two main types the sources discuss, optimistic rollups and ZK rollups.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful to understand their different approaches, especially regarding security and how quickly your transactions become final.
So optimistic rollups first, examples being Arbitrum and Optimism. How do they work?
Optimistic rollups operate, as the name suggests, on an optimistic assumption. They assume that all the transactions processed off-chain on the L2 are valid by default.
Okay, but how does the network make sure nothing invalid gets through if they're just assuming it's okay?
They rely on a challenge period. After a batch of L2 transactions is posted to Layer 1, there's a window of time, typically around 7 days, during which anyone watching the chain can submit something called a fraud proof to Layer 1 if they detect an invalid state transition occurred within that L2 batch.
A fraud proof, so someone has to actively watch and challenge mistakes.
Exactly. If a fraud proof is submitted and successfully verified on Layer 1, the invalid transaction batch is reverted and the network state is corrected. Penalties usually apply to the entity that submitted the invalid batch.
Okay, so there's that waiting period, that challenge window for finality. How do ZK rollups, like ZK Sync, approach this differently?
ZA rollups use a fundamentally different approach based on advanced cryptography, specifically zero-knowledge proofs, or ZKPs.
Zero-knowledge proofs sounds complex.
They are computationally intensive to generate, yes. But instead of assuming validity and waiting for challenges, the ZK rollup generates a cryptographic proof, the ZKP, that mathematically proves the validity of all the transactions in the batch before that batch data, and the proof are submitted to Layer 1.
So one system assumes valid unless proven fraudulent, while the other provides mathematical proof of validity right from the start.
That's the core difference, yes. And this leads directly to a key difference in finality time.
How so?
With ZK rollups, once the batch is settled on L1 with its validity proof, the transactions within that batch are considered final almost instantly from the L1 perspective. Their validity is mathematically guaranteed by the proof.
Whereas with optimistic rollups, you really have to wait for that 7-day challenge period to pass before you can be absolutely certain the transaction is final on Layer 1 and won't be challenged.
Generally speaking, yes. That challenge period is the window for potential reversions based on fraud proofs.
And the security implication follows from that. ZK is mathematically guaranteed. Optimistic relies on watchers.
Pretty much. ZK rollups offer mathematical certainty based on the cryptography. Optimistic rollups rely on game theory and the assumption that at least one honest actor is monitoring and will submit a fraud proof if needed. Sources also sometimes note that ZK rollups might achieve slightly lower gas fees on L1 because the validity proofs can sometimes allow for more efficient data compression when posting back to L1.
Interesting. And specifically regarding ZK Sync, the sources mentioned its use of ZKPs for that instant settlement aspect. They also highlighted the ZK token and the concept of an airdrop.
Right. ZK Sync is a prominent example of a ZK rollup. The ZK token is its native governance token, designed to allow token holders to participate in the future direction and decision-making of the ZK Sync ecosystem, usually through delegation.
And the airdrop.
The airdrop was a large one-time distribution of these ZK tokens to early users, developers, and contributors to the network. It was based on their historical activity and contributions, aiming to decentralize governance right from the start and reward the community that helped build and use the network early on. It's a common mechanism in crypto to bootstrap decentralization and incentivize adoption.
Okay, that makes sense. So bringing all of this together now for you, the listener.
Yeah, the main takeaway really is that understanding these underlying dynamics of how gas fees work and then actively using the tools and strategies we've talked about, it really puts you in a much more powerful position.
It can definitely reduce the cost and honestly just the frustration that can sometimes come with interacting on Ethereum.
For sure. And the goal isn't to somehow magically get rid of fees entirely.
Oh, yeah.
We've established they're essential, right, for the network's function for its security.
Right. It's about optimization. It's about making informed choices to pay fees efficiently.
Exactly. Whether that's something as simple as picking the right time of day for a less urgent transaction,
Or batching multiple actions together if you're doing a lot.
or checking those real-time gas estimation tools before you hit send.
Maybe looking for platform discounts or those gasless opportunities.
And most critically, certainly in today's landscape, really embracing a layer 2 solution for most of your activity.
These strategies really do give you more control over your costs and ultimately can leave more ETH in your wallet, which is always good.
Definitely.
Okay, so quick recap then. Gas fees. Necessary cost for computation on Ethereum, paid in ETH via GUI, calculated based on the work needed, gas units limit, times a price that changes with network demand, mainly that algorithmically adjusted base fee, which gets burned, plus any optional priority fee tip for validators.
And high congestion, peak times, complex transactions, those are what drive fees up.
Hmm.
Transactions can get stuck as pending if fees are too low, needing a potentially costly speed up.
And they can fail due to errors, but crucially, you still pay the gas for the attempt because the validator did the work.
But the key positive takeaway is you have powerful strategies,
Hmm.
timing transactions, using gas tools, batching actions, leveraging platform discounts.
And most effectively, moving your activity to layer 2s like optimistic rollups, Arbitrum, Optimism, or ZK rollups, ZK Sync base. These offer massive savings and faster speeds by handling transactions off-chain and settling them efficiently in batches on layer 1.
Right. We've kind of explored how the tech, the market dynamics, user behavior all come together to create this gas fee system, and also how new layers and tools are constantly being built and adopted to make the user experience better.
So considering all of this, the base layer mechanics, the evolution with EIP 1559, the rise of layer 2s, the tools now available, it makes you wonder, how might the future of using decentralized applications on Ethereum feel fundamentally different in just a few more years?
Yeah, what new kinds of interactions, what new possibilities really open up when transaction costs are no longer this major barrier for everyday usage, especially as these scaling solutions become even more integrated, maybe even invisible in the background.